Thank you guys for being here on Memorial Day weekend. I know a lot of people are out of town, but I appreciate you coming tonight. If you have a Bible, we're going to look at Ecclesiastes 9. We're going to look at the first 10 verses. We're going to kind of work our way through it tonight, but like Trey said, we're wrapping it up. This is it tonight. So we spent about 2 months in Ecclesiastes, which is really, I guess it depends on how you feel about Ecclesiastes. Yeah, it was either really good or really depressing. But to recap, which is kind of what we're going to do tonight, we've covered a lot so far. So we talked about pleasure and the paradox that, pursuing pleasure, what that looks like and how that can get us into trouble sometimes. We've talked about work. The teacher in Ecclesiastes has a lot to say about how we can find meaning and value in our work, the changing seasons of life, how to deal with seasons that are really beneficial and successful and seasons that aren't as beneficial and successful. We talked about money. We've talked about how to deal with disappointment. And so as we wrap up tonight, I want us to look at a couple of different themes that we actually haven't really had a chance to dive that deep into. And full transparency, there's going to be probably a lot of things tonight that we're not really going to fully explore that you might have questions about, and that's okay. We could spend a whole year in Ecclesiastes and not even get to the bottom of which is what we're going to do next year, so stick around. The title of tonight's teaching is Death and the Good Life. Death and the Good Life. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight from all sorts of different places, from places of grief and anguish, places of anger, places of joy and excitement, apprehension, anxiety. And as we prepare our hearts to hear your word, we just lay all of that at your feet tonight. May that not distract us from the truth that you have from your word. May we be receptive to take what we learn tonight and meditate on it and reflect on it and allow it to shape us and deform us just as it has for many, many years. Holy Spirit, we ask that you would comfort us, that you would challenge us, and that you would convict us where we need those things. We pray all this in your name. Amen. Well, when I was 9, I was karate flipped by another 9-year-old in a church bathroom. What that means, you didn't laugh, so you don't know what that means. I don't know the situation. I don't know what happened. I know we got into a little bit of a hustle, and it wasn't anything, like I wasn't standing up for anybody. It wasn't right versus wrong. I think he said something like dumb about Star Wars, and I wanted to fight him about it. And I was taking karate classes at the time, so I felt really confident in myself, and this guy didn't look like he was that big. I didn't throw a punch or anything like that. This is very uncharacteristic of me. If you know me now, this is blowing your mind. But essentially, what he did somehow was, that thing where like if somebody punches you, you take their arm and you kind of flip them over your shoulder. That's what happened to me. So I was walking towards him, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground, lost my breath, I couldn't breathe, and based on the situation where I had landed and what was happening, I realized that I had been karate flipped by this other 9-year-old. I had really underestimated him and his judo abilities or whatever. Apparently he was doing something more intense than I was. I learned an important lesson that day, which is that everybody, and maybe this is more to make myself feel better that I'm including all of you in this, but I think everybody needs a moment like that where you're flipped onto your back in a bathroom of a Baptist church in Texas. And here's what I mean is I learned very quickly in that moment that life did not revolve around me, that there were things that I could not control, and that there was a reality outside of myself that I hadn't really come accustomed to before. And I think everybody, I bet if we went around the room, many of us have probably had a story like that, where you're hit in the face with reality, or you're thrown on your back by reality, and it doesn't feel good, and it kind of hurts, and it's a little embarrassing, and it's a little humbling, it's a little humiliating, but in those moments, they can be defining because we have a couple choices. We can take it for what it is, and we can move on. We can learn from it. We can move forward. We can speak about it 20-something years later in front of a bunch of people. Or we can let it make us bitter. We can make it let it make us angry into people who are apathetic and anxious because we've been humiliated. We've been hit in the face with reality. And I bring all this up because I think Ecclesiastes is meant to be that kind of book. I think when you read through Ecclesiastes, you're supposed to come face to face with truth and reality that doesn't make you feel good, but that you know is real and true. And when you meditate on it, when you take the time to let it sink into your heart and think about how it applies to you as a person, it can feel like you've had the wind knocked out of you, like you've been flipped by a 9-year-old in the bathroom. And so a lot of this comes to play in Ecclesiastes 9, which is why I think it's good that we're ending with it, because this ties together a lot of what we've talked about so far. So tonight we're going to cover a lot of material that maybe we've covered already. It might not be new for you, but I think it's important for us to understand why this matters for us today. So Ecclesiastes 9, starting in verse 1, this is the teacher, right? Koholeth is the name. He's the teacher. He's giving us wisdom, how to live our life around the reality of the presence of God. He says, "Indeed, I took all of this to heart and explained it all." So he's about to summarize everything that we've covered so far. That's why he says, "I took all this to heart and explained it all." This is his summary of everything in Ecclesiastes so far. The righteous, the wise, and their works are in God's hands. People don't know whether to expect love or hate. Everything lies ahead of them. So that's his summary. We'll pause there for a minute. This is the way that the teacher wants you to understand the message of what he said so far, is that the fate of righteous people is in God's hands. Now, when you hear the word fate, we're gonna read it here. It's in the next verse, but throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, don't think of the afterlife. Don't think of our ultimate faith. For the most part, the teacher in Ecclesiastes doesn't have that in mind. What he does have in mind when he says fate is the outcomes of life, everything under the sun. That's like a phrase meaning this life, what we see, what we can observe, what we can measure out. He doesn't really, for his purposes, he's not as interested in like heaven and the new creation and all of that. And so when you read about fate, think about your life, the good things that happen to you and the bad things, the stressful things and the freeing things, the suffering, seasons of disappointment, and the seasons of joy. This is all part of your fate. And what he's saying now is that everything that we've talked about so far is in God's hands. The result of your righteousness, right? If you accept his advice so far, you follow wisdom, you seek wisdom, and you pursue God, how that plays out in your life, the effects of that, is not actually up to you at all. It's in God's hands. That's why he says people don't know whether to expect love or hate. He's saying that you can't really know what's going to happen. In your life, you might get good, you might get evil. People might love you, people might hate you. What he's not saying is that God is going to love you or hate you. Right? He's saying that the works of your hands, the results, the outcomes of the way that you live your life is up to God. It's not up to you. We don't actually know what the results of our daily actions will be. And so in Ecclesiastes, the teacher, this whole book, he's been challenging everything we know about life and the way that it works, right? The systems that we try and play by, we try and put rules and parameters so we can make sense of the world. And the teacher is combating that. He's confronting that. And he's taking everything that we've assumed about life and challenging it. And we know this because we've looked at the book so far. So we know that sometimes it's true that following God and pursuing wisdom works for you. That's true. And sometimes it doesn't. That's equally true. All right, sometimes being smart with your money, we talked about this a few weeks ago, gains you more wealth and favor with others. There are a lot of proverbs about how to spend your money wisely, to be a good steward, and how God will bless that. I believe that's true, but I also think that sometimes the economy is just really bad. Sometimes gas prices are really low, and it's great, and sometimes they're really high, and there's nothing you can really do about it. It's just the ebb and flow of seasons of life. It doesn't mean you mismanaged your money, or it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody sinned. It just means that that's the way that it is. Sometimes pursuing every passion and desire in your heart leaves you empty and lacking, and sometimes it doesn't. There are a lot of people I know that don't follow Jesus, who have pursued every passion and pleasure that they want, their desires, and they've experienced some level of joy. Joy is not exclusive to Christians. I think true joy is, that's another topic, but people can feel happy when they pursue their pleasures and passions. All right, the goal of Ecclesiastes is not to say that you should do this or do the other. He's trying to point out that everybody's going to experience the same thing. Ecclesiastes 8, the passage right before this, is all about God's justice in the world. And he says that sometimes we do see God's justice enacted here on earth. The wicked have something coming for them, and it's God and his justice. And other times, we don't see that in this world. And sometimes when we do see it, it actually is futile. It doesn't leave us feeling as satisfied with justice as we want because our hearts are made for life beyond this. The bottom line is even justice on this earth, no matter how we define that or what it looks like, can feel unsatisfying and temporary. And the word that's used over and over again in Ecclesiastes is hevel, right? It means futile. It means temporary, elusive. What we have, it doesn't last that long. If life is hevel, it's just temporary. It's also elusive. That satisfaction is just, it's like a vapor. It's like a smoke. You can see it and you can almost feel it, but you can't grab it. And you can't touch it. And so when tragedy strikes, right, when we go through seasons of up and down, when we have the bad diagnosis, when things are good, what do? It's human nature. We rationalize. Right? We want to make a system out of it. We want to explain why that is. Ecclesiastes 9, really the whole book of Ecclesiastes says you can't figure it out. And we learned last week there are a lot of reasons why God allows good and evil to happen to us. But the bottom line is life is an enigma. Actually, there are a lot of scholars that would argue one of the other translations for the word hevel is enigma. It's like a puzzle. You can't figure it out. And so we don't know what's going to happen. You don't know whether what you do is going to yield good fruit or bad fruit, good results or bad results. And so this is important for us. I think we have to start here because we have to understand this is. I mean, many of us, and again, we talked about this last week, so I'm not going to rehash this, but a lot of times we want to make our relationship with God a formula. And God comes to us not with an answer or with an equation, but as a father who's there with us in the ups and the downs, no matter what that looks like. And so we have to start here. This is what the teacher is saying. This is how he sums it all. The righteous, the wise, and their works are in God's hands, not in your hands. Move on in verse 2. He says, everything is the same for everyone. There is one fate for the righteous and the wicked, for the good and the bad, for the clean and the unclean, for the one who sacrifices and the one who does not sacrifice. As it is for the good, so also it is for the sinner. As it is for the one who takes an oath, so also for the one who fears an oath. So the teacher, what he's doing here is he's leveling the playing fields, right? So as I've been reading this passage and kind of looking over it and trying to figure out what to teach on and what this really means, I was confronted with and I think maybe some of you do this too. Actually, I think all of us do this to some extent, whether we're willing to admit it or not. But one of the ways that I deal with seasons of difficulty and suffering in life is by categorizing people. Right? I put people into camps. I ostracize myself from people that aren't like me. I compartmentalize my own life. And so broadly speaking, people are generally righteous like me, maybe not always in actions, but certainly in motive. And then there are the unrighteous that are not like me. And so when something bad happens to me, it's so jarring because it doesn't fit the category that I've created for myself. And I think a lot of us do this as well. Actually, the whole society does this. It's so pervasive, from tribalism in our politics, which we've talked about before, to who we associate with in our family. We put people in boxes because it helps us make sense of the world. And the teacher is actually playing to these generalizations by leveling the playing field and giving us that reality check that no one is better than anyone else. No one is inherently better than anyone else because we all have the same fate. So he says that there are those who are righteous, right? There are those who are clean. They offer sacrifices. They're good people. They're not afraid to take an oath, meaning they have integrity. Like their life, their word means something because of their character, who they are. And then there are those people who are on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. They are unrighteous. They're unclean. They don't offer sacrifices, meaning they're not religious people. They don't have enough integrity to take an oath. They're fearful of it because of who they are. The bottom line is we all have the same outcome. And the works of our works as righteous people or unrighteous people, whatever, are also in God's hands. It doesn't matter how you live your life. You can't manipulate the hand of God. Now, it's important to note here, the teacher is not commenting on whether it's right or wrong to do these things. Other books in the Bible, you'll read that the biblical authors will commend the righteous and condemn the wicked, and they'll say, be more like the righteous. There's passages you can even point to that seem to indicate God will bless you if you're righteous. And that's certainly true, but the teacher in Ecclesiastes wants us to know this is not always true. It's not always true that being righteous will get you good results. His point is simply to remind us that if we count on these things, our righteousness, it will not actually save us from our ultimate fate. And again, our fate is the outcome in life. It's the success, it's the failure, it's the promotion, it's the demotion, it's the joy, the happiness, depression, sadness, all of that. But it also goes further than that. Verse 3, this is the fate that we all share. He says, this is an evil in all that is done under the sun. There is one fate for everyone. In addition, the hearts of the people are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. After that, they go to the dead. So that's the fate. This is the leveling playing field. We have to understand this. Whether you're righteous, you're not righteous. You will have good in life, you will have bad in life. You'll have good seasons, bad seasons, joy, sorrow. But at the end of the day, we're all going to die. Yeah. It's Happy Memorial. Sorry, all right. Now, this is hard for a couple reasons. Because I think, one, some of us are so accustomed to death and grief that we don't need to hear this. And so if that's you, I'm not really talking to you now. Others of us, I think, have a tendency to completely blow past the reality of death. And I think this is true, especially in Christian circles. I think that we almost mock death because Jesus made a mockery of death. And to that, I say yes and amen, that's true. Right? We don't have to fear it. Death does not have the final say over us. But we do ourselves and others an immense disservice when we don't acknowledge the pain and the reality that all lives will experience death. Death is a real thing. And so look again at the beginning of verse 3. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun. What is death? It's an evil. He calls it, in other words, death is not natural. Death is not just something that happens to us. It's not neutral. It's nothing for us to downplay or breeze past or ignore. One of the worst things you can say to somebody who's grieving is they're in a better place now. That's true. Technically, that's true, but you've just completely blown past. There's an entire book of the Bible called Lamentations. You know what it means to lament? It means to grieve, to acknowledge that death is a tragedy. And so death is evil. And he ties it actually to the evil within ourselves, the evil and the wickedness in our own hearts. Death is not God's actions. It's not God that kills. It's ourselves who bring death into the world. But death itself is still an evil. And this is so counter to our culture today because our American society, like the culture of excess, capitalism, materialism, all of that stuff is dependent upon you not thinking about death. And so what do we like to do? We distract ourselves with products, with experiences, with entertainment, all so we don't have to think about the reality of death. We talked about this week 1. Time, chance, and death are the great enemies of all of us. And so we firmly, listen, again, we believe firmly, 100%, that death is not the end for those who follow Jesus. That for you and I, as followers of the way of Jesus, we will live life in heaven. We will be a part of the new creation. We'll be resurrected in new physical bodies. We'll probably work. We'll be in communion with God, fellowship with one another. It's going to be fantastic. But, again, we cannot ignore the reality of death. It doesn't make death less real. In death, earthly accomplishments, everything that we work for, is completely evaporated. It's gone. Right? Relationships are broken between followers of Jesus and those who have rejected Jesus. Death is a thief. It robs us of the goodness and the pleasures of life. It robs us of potential. It robs other people of potential. And in death, we face a certain level of uncertainty. We might know that we're going to be with Jesus, but some of us, we don't know what that's going to look like. And life, for a lot of us, we've gone through good seasons of life that we really enjoy, and the questions come up before. How can heaven, new creation, be better than this? In death, we say goodbye to people, to experiences, to things. There's an uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen exactly. And we might have faith, but that still leaves room for a little bit of doubt. Death brings all of our fears, our doubts, our collective anxiety as a society to the surface. And it starts with our own hearts. And so all of this to say that we will face death. That's a certainty. And not just as a natural phenomenon, but as an actual evil, the result of sin, something that is worth fighting and being defeated, which, again, we acknowledge. But we have to understand that it's a reality. So, to sum up so far, two things that this means for us today. The teacher wants us to know this before we move on. Number one, good and evil happen to both the good and the evil. So our daily actions might not get us the experience that we want. It might not get us the good things that we want. It might get us bad things, whether you're a good person or an evil person. Evil people have good days too. That's straight from the New Testament. And Christians and non-Christians know this. This is something that everybody knows. It's not just something that we know. We know that life is sort of, it feels like chance. We know God is in control, but on our end, it still feels like chance. And then the second thing is everybody's going to die. And again, this is an evil to reflect on, not an inconvenience that we can breeze past. And so these are the two realities that can feel like a punch in the face. And all of us, I know, have experienced a time or another in our lives where we've been hit with maybe one of these or maybe both of these. And it's the worst when they're combined, when good people experience death before their time. And I think this is why it's important. I was really fearful to preach this after this week, hearing everything that happened. But the teacher actually has something really important to show us about death, if we're willing to listen to it and hear it. But before we do that, I think we have to be confronted with ourselves, because we all know these two truths, and our knowledge of these two realities causes us to live in a way that is sort of reactionary against them. And I think that as I was thinking through this and looking at my own life and doing studies and looking at what other scholars had to say about this passage, I think we can boil all of our reactions to the reality of death in four ways. And notice how each of these four ways is actually an escape. It's a way to not actually deal with it. Number one is by responding with anger. And so we can shake our fists at God, or if you're not a Christian, the universe or fate or whatever. But ultimately, and I think this comes out in my own life, is I just get really angry with life in like a generic sense. And then what I do is I expect the worst from people. So I love Ecclesiastes. It's very cynical. It's like me. And I'm working through that. It's okay. But this is what happens when you don't know how to respond to death. You don't know how to embrace it. You just become angry. And you take it out on other people. And it's an escape because it allows you to escape the reality of unfairness in this life and the certainty of death. You're just so focused on the things you can't control. The second result, or the second response is, maybe for you it's not anger, but it's anxiety. And so our lives are marked by a constant state of fear. We would do anything to avoid the pain of death and unfair circumstances. And this is an escape because it makes us focus on the future rather than deal with the present. Your anxiety might not feel like an escape, but really, if you're so concerned with what might happen, you're not really there to deal with what is happening to you now, whether it's good or bad. And for some of us, it's apathy. We don't care, right? We just acknowledge death. It is what it is. Life stinks. We can't do anything about it. So we just keep our thoughts and our plans short term. There's no care for the future. We don't take part in any purpose. We don't try and find meaning. This is an escape because it's an easy way for us to shy away from the difficult results of our work in life. We will never fail if we don't ever try, right? At work, in life, at home, at school. And then some of us respond with amusement. All right, we escape through our explicit participation in pleasure by orienting our lives around consumption, entertainment, and experiences. It's all about getting and chasing the next high, the next escape, the next vacation. And without wisdom, this is the best that we can do, right? These are the only ways that we can respond. But like I said, the teacher actually offers us a better way. And so let's pick up in verse 4. But there is hope for whoever is joined with all the living, since a live dog is better than a dead lion, right? Yeah. For the living know that they will die, but the dead don't know anything. There is no longer a reward for them because the memory of them is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their envy have already disappeared, and there is no longer a portion for them in all that is done under the sun. Now, according to the teacher, did you catch this? The hope is not found in escaping these realities, but actually embracing them. So he uses that, I don't know if it's a quip or like an idiom or a phrase, but He sort of says it like, as you know, a live dog is better than a dead lion. Dogs were not respected. They were seen as like lowly animals, and lions were very well respected. And so his point is that a dog still gets the benefit of living, right? As awful as his life might be, he still gets to enjoy it and live the rest of it. A dead lion, as respected and as many benefits as he has to reap being like the king of the jungle, he's dead. He has nothing to gain from his life because his life is gone. And then in verse 5, he gives you the hope. The living know that they will die. In other words, it's not good enough to just accept death as a reality. I think a lot of us are at this point where we know that death is going to happen, but we're still searching for ways to make it mean something, how to let it impact the way that we live. It's not just enough to accept it as reality and make the most of what we can. Because as awful as death is, according to the teacher, becoming comfortable with our death, right? Being accustomed to it, learning what it means to be alive in the midst of death, embracing it as a reality, not just accepting it, but actually embracing it, can actually be a blessing. Now, how does this work? I think there are two ways to look at this. One is very surface level. This is where a lot of people stop is, well, live life to the fullest, right? Carpe diem, seize the day. Make the most of what you can because one day it's going to end. Life stinks. It is what it is. Make the most of it, live your life, enjoy your experiences, do the best that you can with what you have. We're all going to die anyway, so it's okay. And this is fine. This is an okay takeaway. I think that's generally true. I mean, that's all facts, right? You are going to die, so you might as well make the most of your time. But the problem with this is that I think is an incomplete view, not the perspective that the teacher wants us to gain. And you think about it like, it's sort of like if you're, and we've talked about this before, there's an article by Tim Keller, who's a famous pastor theologian who got a cancer diagnosis, and they were trying to deal with it in all these different ways. One of the ways was by taking a lot of vacations with whatever time they had left, him and his wife, and they found that they couldn't enjoy the vacations. I do this. I don't even have cancer, and I do this. The minute I start a vacation, I'm just thinking about how it's going to end. It's like you're ready for it to be done. It's day one. My wife and I, 10 days in Maui for our honeymoon years ago. And well, years ago, it was like 3? I know. She's in kids. It's okay. But the day we got there, the day we landed, I was already thinking about how it was going to end. Like, one day this is not going to be here, so I'm trying to enjoy it, but I get so anxious, and I can't do that. I think that's the equivalent of what this kind of perspective is you're constantly aware of death, you try and make the most of it, but it doesn't quite get you to a place of true contentment and joy. The deeper level, I think this is what the teacher wants us to get, and there's a little bit of nuance here. Knowing that we will die will actually free us from the bondage of escape. It'll free us really from the need that we have for control. And here's what that looks like. Anger, apathy, anxiety, amusement, all of those things hold us in bondage because these are the things that we rely on, that we depend on for escape. And so embracing death means that we can let go of trying to escape it. We can let go of trying to ignore it. We can prioritize it. That death, in a way, can actually be a teacher. It can show us not just how to spend our time, but how to make the most of it, how to prioritize our time, how to put the hours that we do have into something that's meaningful. And as followers of Jesus, we know that death, as awful as it is not the end for us. We can accept it, we can embrace it, we can reflect on it, and then allow it to shape how we live and how we love others. And we find joy and freedom in giving up this control. It's a silly example, but the worst job I ever worked was when I was in college. I worked overnights at Albertsons, stocking all night. So I'd go in at 11, clock out at 6 in the morning, and you would just stock the whole store, and I hated it. I was there for about a year and a half, and I was close enough to graduating that I didn't want to find a new job because I didn't know what I wanted to do yet, and so all of my energy and my effort I spent trying to make the job better, right? I was looking for promotions, I was looking for for raises, for better hours, for more time off, all sorts of things. And then when I figured out what I wanted to do, I didn't want to work there anymore, I was going to move here, go to grad school, all that stuff, and I officially handed in my 2-week notice. And it was accepted. Of course she was going to accept. I was going to leave in 2 weeks anyways, but they took it. And I knew I had a time limit, right? I knew that I only had 2 weeks left of my job here. And so all that energy that I spent trying to ignore it, trying to make these 2 weeks better, my time here better, was actually spent just enjoying the moment. And a weird thing happened where I actually started to enjoy the moment. Like I enjoyed the long hours. I enjoyed stocking cereal at 2 a.m. I enjoyed like my coworkers who I did not enjoy before. I was able to look past the things that bothered me about them, and I was able to see that they're people, and this is temporary, and this is going to end, and I need to make the most of this present moment. And then when I left, I drove away, and I was really sad. I did not want to leave Albertsons. I was like, maybe I can go back, maybe I can visit or something like that. I don't know. The point is that all that energy that I spent, in a way, I think death does the same thing to us on like a cosmic scale. It allows us to refocus, reorient our energy towards not escaping it, not downplaying it, not ignoring it, but using it to teach us what is really important. And so the good life, because that's really what this is about. How do we access the good life? What is good and true and beautiful? What is ultimately meaningful and satisfying? How we find that is not just in acknowledging death, but in embracing it. Right, we let go of the outcomes. We know how it's going to end. We know that I didn't need to count on job promotions and things like that when I worked at Albertsons overnight. I knew that was out of my control. It was in God's hands. God holds our works in his hands. This goes back to verse 1. And so that could end there, but the teacher actually has more words of hope, because not only does he encourage us to embrace death, he also commands us to enjoy life. So Ecclesiastes 7 through 10, we'll go through this and then we'll be done. This is in light of everything he's just said about death, by the way. He says everyone's going to die. Just embrace it. Accept it. That's how it all ends. Go. That's a command. All the other times that he's used this phrase, it's been like a suggestion, like, you should do this. Here, it's a command. Go, eat your bread with pleasure, and drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your clothes be white all the time, and never let oil be lacking on your head. White clothes and oil was it signified celebration, or the opposite of mourning. He says, enjoy life with the wife you love all the days of your fleeting life, which has been given to you under the sun. That's under the sun. That's life. It's this life, not heaven, not the afterlife, just what you have right here and right now. All your fleeting days, for that is your portion in life and in your struggle under the sun. Whatever your hands find to do, do with all your strength, because there is no work, planning, knowledge, or wisdom in Sheol where you are going. That last part's a little depressing, but that's not the point. This is a common theme throughout Ecclesiastes. You can actually look earlier in the book in chapter 3, in chapter 5, in chapter 8, chapter 2, it's in there, where the teacher will offer this as the remedy. He brings up all these issues. What do? Work is meaningless. Your life stinks. It's not going to be good. Everything under the sun, it's futile. It's evasive. Work is awful. Your love life is bad. Your money doesn't do anything for you. So what should you do? Well, there's nothing better than to rejoice and enjoy life. In chapter 3, he says it's the gift of God when anyone drinks, eats, and enjoys all his efforts. In chapter 5, he says the same thing about work. There's meaninglessness in your work. Deal with it by eating, drinking, enjoying all the good in the labor that is done under the sun. In chapter 8, the futility of earthly justice, when the wicked get off easy and the righteous are punished. He says, I commend enjoyment, for there's nothing better than for one to eat, drink, and enjoy yourself. Now, here's what he's not saying. The teacher is not advocating for like hedonism or just mindless consumption. We talked about this week 2, the paradox of pleasure. You can go back and listen to it. That doesn't get you anywhere. What he is arguing for is contentment. Contentment, according to the teacher, is the key to the good life. This is how I would define contentment / the good life, is embracing life as it is, not as you think it should be. One of the greatest messages of hope throughout this book is that there is still a good life to be enjoyed. When you embrace life as it is, when you let go of the outcomes, when you acknowledge that you're going to die and you let God rework your priorities in light of that reality, you can begin to enjoy the simple things like a good meal, like a good drink with friends and family, and you do it with a genuinely cheerful heart, not with anxiety about the future, not with anger about what's happened to you, but with joy. This is contentment. If you're married, love the person you're with. Right? He says, enjoy the wife that you have in your life. Don't wish they were better. Don't want someone new. And at the end, he says, work with meaning and enjoyment. Give the outcome to God. Because God controls it, yes, but also because you're going to die. The result of your hands, it's not you can't take that with you into the afterlife. And so embracing the reality of death is the key to finding the good life. Not just enjoying life in spite of death, but accepting the permanence of death and the certainty that one day everything will end, and allowing that to free us from the illusion that we carry that we can control things. And so as we close, I want to offer just a simple way that I think we can do this. It takes time, it takes repetition, it takes willpower to get here. You can't just wake up and be okay with the fact that you're going to die. Nobody can do that. But what we can do is train ourselves by following the way of Jesus, by implementing daily rituals and practices in our lives that move and align our hearts towards the joy that's found in Christ. And so what I offer is a daily ritual of gratitude. In practicing gratitude, we learn to be content with what we have and with who we are. We also have the opportunity to reflect on death. The things that we're discontent with will one day pass. The things that we chase after for contentment will also one day pass. And we realize that joy is elusive, but only if it's grounded in our wealth, our reputation, the things that we're after. One of the biggest messages of hope in Ecclesiastes is that everything is hevel except contentment. You'll never hear the teacher say that about joy in the book. Joy is always there to be found if you want it. If you're not looking in the wrong places for it. It's not found in chasing pleasures, in different work, in better circumstances. All of that is hevel. What is not hevel is embracing life as you have it, not as you want it to be. And so here's a 3-step ritual for gratitude that I encourage you, try it for a week. Try it every day. Take 5 minutes and just think through these 3 questions. Number 1, what has God done for me? Right? What prayers has God answered in your life? What seasons has God brought you in and out of? What season does he have you in now? Right? What has God actually done for you? You have a testimony. If you believe in Jesus, how has God saved you from the life that you once lived? Reflecting on that is a powerful thing. Number 2, what has God given me? So you can be as superficial or as deep as you want here. Think about the wealth. All of us, we decry gas prices, and I understand that's put a lot of people in stress and economic struggle, but we still have roofs over our heads, most of us. Those of us that don't have other things to be grateful for. All of us, in America, we have it pretty good. I've said this before. We have a lot of issues in this country, and that's okay. I'm grateful to live here, but I'm grateful to live here because I know God has blessed me with material wealth, but also not just material wealth, with things that we call common grace: eating with friends, drinking, good soda, being joyful. All of these things are gifts of God. And then lastly, where am I discontent? Right? Where is God inviting me to give up control? What areas of my life am I not satisfied with? Is it my work? Is it my spouse? Be as honest as you want here. I think doing this might not change you that morning or that night, the first time. It might not change you day 1, day 2, or day 3, but I think over time what you learn to do is embrace life for what it is. Right? You reflect on the fact that it's temporary. The things that you are struggling with now will one day pass. And as we end, I just want to anchor and root all of this in the good news of the gospel, because none of this is possible if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, if he didn't live and die in your place. And so none of this matters if we don't put our faith and our hope in the finished work of Christ. In verse 7, it says, God has already accepted you for your works. He accepts you and your works because of Christ and what he's done for you. And so we can embrace death because we know that it's not the end. We can embrace death because we know that it can teach us a valuable lesson about what it means to follow Jesus. And we can embrace death because we know Christ has defeated it in our place. Let's pray.